What's up? This is The Other Map, and this video is about graffiti in the city of São Paulo in Brazil, a city that has one of the largest and most vibrant scenes in the world. It also has a tagging culture, pichacao, that's more or less unique to the city, and a heavy mural and street art culture. We'll get into what's going on and how the city became such a powerhouse, but first we need some background on the roots of graffiti, which is one of the four main elements of hip-hop, that gigantic city-destroying monster that has been taking over planet Earth for the last 50 years. Everything in hip-hop, which turned 50 in 2023, comes back to the movement's four core elements: graffiti, breakdancing, DJing, and rapping. You can think about the four elements as four things needed at a party: musicians, dancers, someone on the mic, and a crazy flyer announcing the show pasted around the neighborhood. But that's just the genesis, as hip-hop has stretched pretty far from its initial definition. For example, there has long been a huge hip-hop subculture devoted to loop-based beat-making and sampling, even though that's not one of the original elements. Beatboxing, essentially turning your mouth into a drum set, was another early evolution. Hip-hop has as many definitions as it does practitioners, so there's a disclaimer here. The opinions in this video are just mine and aren't definitive. However, there are things most hip-hop heads can agree on. For one thing, all four of the elements came of age in New York City, largely within the African American community. There are far too many influential New York heads to list here, but artists like DJ Kool Herc, Phase 2, the Sugar Hill Gang, Crazy Legs, and Marley Marl would all jumpstart hip-hop art forms within the five boroughs. Eventually, hip-hop would go national and would find innovators across the USA, whether it was the slowed-down rap music of Houston's DJ Screw or turntablism as evolved by the Invisible Scratch Pickles in the San Francisco Bay Area. Hip-hop would also see foreign takes on its elements, such as British drum and bass, which has sampled the drum break of a song named Amen Brother by the Winstons so many times that it is unquestionably the most sampled song of all time. Today, hip-hop is absolutely everywhere, worldwide, in every way. Now, this means a number of things. The first is that hip-hop has lost context, in the sense that no one is required to do their homework before taking up rapping, making beats, breakdancing, or tagging as a hobby. Hip-hop was born out of struggle, and I strongly feel that people that take part in it need to give back to the communities that grew hip-hop into what it is today, because in many ways those communities are still struggling. In that vein, I'm putting a link below to donate to the Common Ground Foundation, an organization that helps youth in Chicago and is run by legendary MC Common. But another side effect of hip-hop's global takeover is that, well, countries vary, and you get unique situations like modern sampling in Russia, which, lest we forget, is home to an insanely creative population in addition to vast corruption and dictators. Sampling in most of the world is easy prey for lawyers, but the fact that enforcing intellectual property laws in Russia is flat out impossible means that beatmakers in that country can pretty much sample whatever they want and release it publicly, which they do. Individual national histories mix with hip-hop in interesting ways, and we're only getting more of those situations as hip-hop continues to dig into all corners of the globe. Breakdancing is probably one of the most globalized hip-hop elements, and also one with the most regional variation. Traditions like capoeira in Brazil and yoga in India influenced the breakdancing scenes of those countries, for example. Korean crews dominated the global scene in the early 2000s, while Russian crews like the Predators are big today, as are Ukrainian crews, and East Asian countries like Taiwan and China are powerhouses, which makes sense given the martial arts background in East Asia. This worldwide spread was, of course, partially facilitated by the user-generated video site you're watching this video on right now. But breakdancing also made its way around the world in ways that are counterintuitive, and via vessels that were imperfect, to say the least. For example, the first exposure many nations had to breakdancing would have been from, sadly, globally distributed Hollywood movies like 2004's You Got Served, which gave audiences a watered-down pop music version of breakdancing and hip-hop dance. Even still, that little bit of exposure opened the floodgates, and hardcore scenes would pop up worldwide in the aftermath of that and other dance movies. In the same way, the global spread of graffiti culture could take somewhat odd paths. A Canadian artist named Dabs1 moved to Taiwan around 2001 to teach English, but ended up becoming an ambassador for the culture in Taiwan in the absence of a cohesive local scene. Artists from the San Francisco Bay Area would then descend on Taiwan, such as Optimist, Check, Udon, and Noe, giving the country's graffiti a vibe that had evolved in California well after graffiti's East Coast genesis. Taiwan's scene saw some bumps as it got going, but overall is now one of the strongest scenes in Asia, with parts of the cities of Taipei and Kaohsiung set aside as official street art zones. Which brings us to São Paulo. The country of Brazil has a graffiti scene that is extremely unique due to multiple factors, some of which are local, like the fact that cops have real problems and no trip is hard on graffiti, while others have to do with what foreign influences managed to first trickle into the country, such as the writing styles of heavy metal album covers. The scene that has resulted is just nuts, and the capital of Brazilian graffiti is without a doubt São Paulo, and it's all well worth knowing more about. I've used a few books for this video, as well as doing some internet research, but I have to give a major shout out to an artist friend, Props from Out of Hand Crew, who spent several months in Brazil soaking up its graffiti culture. Thanks for the interview and the photos, which were taken in both São Paulo and Rio. That said, I take full credit for inaccuracies, so make sure to comment if I got anything wrong, and check the comments section to see if any corrections have been made. First off, Brazil has major scenes in cities like Rio de Janeiro, Recife, Olinda, Belo Horizonte, and Porto Alegre, but graffiti culture in the country began in and is still centered on the city of São Paulo. If you don't know much about São Paulo, the main thing you need to know is that it is huge, absolutely massive. The city itself is home to around 12.4 million, which is gigantic, but the numbers get bigger with the more inclusive your idea of the city is. Beyond its city limits, São Paulo's metropolitan area, which is a measurement of the urban area that is essentially one city connected block after block after block, has a population of over 20.7 million and includes other important cities like those of what is known as the ABC region. If you include nearby cities like Santos, São Paulo's port, and the next door metropolitan area of Campinas, you get São Paulo's macro-metropolitan area, a term I hadn't even heard of before looking at the city's statistics. The population there is 34.5 million. For reference, the population of the United States urban area that runs down the Atlantic coast from Boston to DC, including the New York City metro area, is 50.2 million. However, São Paulo isn't what is known as a primate city, or a city that dominates an entire country, just like London dominates the UK. In this way, Brazil better compares to the United States, similarly consisting of cities of different sizes that specialize in various industries, even though São Paulo is without a doubt the biggest in the group. The Rio de Janeiro metropolitan area clocks in at about the population within São Paulo's city limits. I say all this to set the scene because to a graffiti artist, a city isn't a city, it's a canvas. And while Rio and other Brazilian cities have amazing scenes, they don't have São Paulo's endless urban sprawl, which is why the scene in that specific city is so insane. We'll get to Pichacau later, but let's briefly say that the oldest graffiti-like movement in Brazil was a type of protest writing in one color that continues today in a completely different context. Additionally, there were certainly street artists operating in Brazil before the invention of hip-hop, and after hip-hop media like the movies Style Wars and Wild Style came to Brazil, early hip-hop letters began to appear in Brazilian streets. However, if we're going to be discussing Brazilian graffiti, as in the Brazilian version of the New York street art style, the starting point for the greater scene would be a chance meeting between three artists in São Paulo in 1993. It shouldn't be surprising that the graffiti scene was kicked off in Brazil via an ambassador from the West, similar to the story in Taiwan. In this case, that ambassador was Barry McGee, also known by his alter ego Twist. McGee is a San Francisco graffiti legend and was on a trip to São Paulo via a study abroad program in 1993 where he met the twin artists known as Os Gêmeos. Twist shared hip-hop magazines and graffiti techniques with Os Gêmeos and would go on to paint with them during his time in Brazil. Afterwards, Os Gêmeos would take what McGee showed them and run with it. Twist is famous for his caricature tags of stylized screws, as used in construction, and has a distinct style of painting faces. Os Gêmeos are most famous for their recognizable style of painting colorful figures. Would Brazilian graffiti have turned out differently if an old-school New York head had taken less creative street artists under his wing? I mean, probably. But the fact that it was McGee meeting the twins is probably what took Brazilian graffiti in the direction it ended up going. And this meeting was so influential because otherwise there was a trickle, if not a drought, of outside influence coming into Brazil. The country was, and still is, pretty dangerous. So at the time, Brazil wasn't seen as an appealing destination for traveling artists. And other than the few Western movies and books that made their way to South America, there wasn't much contact with the hip-hop scene in the USA. Supposedly, the back page of The Source, a hip-hop magazine not specifically focused on graffiti, was a major influence. Brazilian artists were on their own, and because of this, the scene carved its own path. With this origin story, you might expect that the scene in Brazil would have evolved differently, but it's still sort of shocking how different it became compared to graffiti in the movement's homeland, the United States. A simple example would be the concept of getting painted over, or having a piece you painted being covered up with someone else's art. In the USA, if you wanted to paint a mural on a wall over some smaller pieces, or put something complicated over some tags, painting over is probably fine, and it's likely no one will start anything over it. However, painting over another artist's piece, intentionally or unintentionally, can lead to conflict between artists and crews, beef that frequently turns physical, even if murder over such things is pretty rare. In Brazil, the rules are a little simpler. Don't paint anyone over. Especially in São Paulo, there are enough walls to go around, so painting someone over is seen as a direct insult to them. Even painting over a simple tag can get you hunted down and beat up. This is why some foreigners will come to Brazil, paint in the streets, and get their asses handed to them, regardless of who they are. However, beef between crews and violence between individuals isn't a huge part of the Brazilian scene. It's more of a community than you find in other places. In short, show everyone respect and your family. The artist that visited Brazil said he's never met so many people so fast, and that they treated him like brethren. But show other artists disrespect and the scene will turn against you in a big way. Other aspects of Brazilian graffiti are also different to normal graffiti culture. Another example is that street graffiti is generally done during the day for the simple reason that Brazil is too dangerous at night. The standards of style are different. Some in the USA might consider Brazilian styles strange and a little too creative compared to US styles, while Brazilians might see more traditional United States styles as too regimented and dry. Caricatures and objects are commonly used instead of letters and names in Brazil. While this happens in US graffiti as well, it's not as often. Chalk it up to the influence of Los Gêmeos, who originally weren't well understood in the United States. Women are also a heavy presence in Brazilian graffiti, with artists like São Paulo's Zaneri being some of Brazil's most famous. In addition, while the relationship between graffiti and skateboarding in the USA is pretty tight, as both are illegal art forms exercised on public property, in Brazil the connection between those cultures is much stronger, as it is in most of Latin America. And while artists certainly have areas they haunt, the concept of turf isn't as concrete as it can be in the USA. Most Brazilian artists, especially in São Paulo, are up in whatever parts of the city they can access. And it's common to see one artist represented on highways and next to train lines throughout their region. However, the most unique aspect of São Paulo graffiti is only tangentially related to Os Gêmeos, as this practice evolved from the protest graffiti that began to go up during Brazil's dictatorship between 1964 and 1985. This political writing would cover buildings. The protest substance of that art form has been lost, however, and the result is what is known as pichacao. This activity is in some ways the opposite of Brazil's more creative graffiti. It's basically dystopian industrial strength tagging. If graffiti is gallery art boiled down to the signature, This Sao Paulo practice takes the vandalism aspect of graffiti and strips everything else away. Utilizing small paint rollers to write in a script influenced by heavy metal album cover fonts, pichadores will do ridiculous things like stand 5 guys on each other's shoulders or rappel down skyscrapers in the middle of the night to put their tag up on a building, and all over that building. Daredevilry is a big part of graffiti, but in Pichacao that's pretty much the whole deal, and crews will paint until a building is absolutely covered. The Instagram page Choppin' Down Films chronicles some of the stuff, and I'll put a link to them in the description. Definitely check that out. Pichadores, or people that do Pichacao, are not graffiti artists in that a mural isn't going to impress a pichador, while a building fully defaced in simple shapes won't wow graffiti artists. However, it's a fucking gnarly subculture that needed to be mentioned. Similarly, we have Sao Paulo's alley scene, which is kind of the opposite of Pichacao. Places like Beco de Batman or Batman Alley offer a more gentrified version of Sao Paulo's graffiti culture, even if they are in themselves pretty cool. Sao Paulo's wealthiest sub-prefecture, of which the city proper has 32, is the area known as Pinheiros. Within this sub-prefecture, you can find Vila Magdalena, a neighborhood that is more or less the Sao Paulo equivalent of San Francisco's Mission District, bursting at the seams with art and edgier culture. And in this neighborhood is the most famous open-air gallery of street art in Brazil, known as the Beco de Batman or Batman Alley. One of the first pieces that went up in this alley was a large painting of Batman in sandals, hence the name. But while you could find things like Batman kissing the Joker on its walls at some points, there is no theme to the art, except that most of the artists are famous. Batman Alley is sort of a museum of street art, with so many pieces from international artists that it would be hard to consider it representative of Brazilian street art alone. It's also a place to go buy art, as some of the buildings that open onto the alley belong to famous artists. Money and tourism have heavily influenced Beco de Batman, but it's far from the only graffiti alley in Sao Paulo. Every neighborhood has its own alley culture, some rougher than others, but all of them worth checking out. In case you were wondering where law enforcement stands in all this, Sao Paulo legalized graffiti in the 1990s, as it was accepted that the art was too big of a problem for the police to solve. Besides, Sao Paulo's cops have bigger issues to deal with, many of which involve more lucrative opportunities for bribes. Another law that had some effect on the scene was 2006 banning of billboards in the city, which helped open up new canvases for graffiti in Sao Paulo. At the same time, the law resulted in major street art pieces in the city being destroyed, which led to the city taking a more welcoming approach to its massive murals. Another political event that affected graffiti in the city was the election of President Jair Bolsonaro, which ushered in some of the first anti-graffiti measures in Brazil's history. However, those efforts did little to contain the city's massive scene. Apparently, almost every single building in downtown Sao Paulo is graffitied to this day, so Bolsonaro failed pretty hard. Brazil remains somewhat isolated as a culture today. It is geographically far from the global north, making it less of a travel destination than places like Europe, Asia, or the USA, and Brazil is relatively poor with all the issues that come along with it. In addition, the Sao Paulo-based First Capital Command Gang is one of the biggest criminal organizations in the world, holding the city in an iron grip, and unintentionally getting on the group's bad side is a death sentence. To be fair to the gang, they exert so much control over the city that low-level street crime is kept in check, for the simple reason that they would prefer it that way. None of this is to say you shouldn't come to Brazil or Latin America in general, which faces similar problems as a region. If you've never been, the sense of freedom there is unique and really cool to experience in today's world of surveillance and general big brotherness. It's good advice, though, to go with connections if you're going to do graffiti. Stepping on toes is best avoided. My artist friend puts Sao Paulo up there with Los Angeles and Berlin in a trifecta of graffiti capitals today, but the two other cities have gigantic scenes for completely different reasons. LA's graffiti landscape is punishment heavy, however. You can lose your driver's license, which would suck in Southern California's sprawl, and it can be violent. Berlin is another story, but is also very different from Sao Paulo. However, the fact that what is essentially a rough outpost of global culture is right up there with the most cutting-edge cultural meccas says something. São Paulo is something special in the world of graffiti. It's easiest to see this at the frequent giant concerts in São Paulo's Central Park equivalent. You have a massive amount of young people with a heavy presence of skateboarders and thousands of graffiti artists and pichadores painting and sharing notebooks. That sounds pretty damn cool. This has been an Other Map video. Like it if you got this far, subscribe to see more. Don't forget to leave a comment if we got something wrong, and check the comments for corrections. Following our Patreon is the best way to stay in the loop about future videos too. Peace out.